That's not ever gonna happen.
That's never going to work. All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to Sass Bites 2015. I took a couple weeks off. It's holidays, bought a house, family, all those typical excuses. But we are back strong because we're going to be diving into a brand new series over the next, however long this takes us. I think this is going to be a really fun and exciting series. I almost started a completely new podcast just to do this series. So I said, no, I'll stop. I think I've got something going already. Let's go ahead and use that. So what we're going to be doing over the next 6, 8, 20 weeks, whatever this takes us, is we're going to be diving in. And Elise is back there, is laughing at me. We're going to be diving into front-end architecture. The reason that we're doing this is, for one, it's been big on our minds. It's been big on my mind over this last year. It's a talk that I gave at CSS DevConf in New Orleans this last fall, and it got a lot of great response. And I really want to keep on going with that and kind of keep moving that forward, keep talking about it, and bringing those things up, as I really think that's going to be a really big hot topic. Kind of the point of the talk was to raise the banner for front-end architecture and to raise, lift a flag and wave it around, basically saying this is a thing, and front-end architecture is a thing. It needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be given time, respect, and attention that it deserves. Comparing it to things like responsive web design and content strategy, that for the longest time people have been doing this stuff, especially content strategy, but never had a name and never had the respect it needed to be able to actually have a time at the beginning of a build to talk about content strategy. So I talked about trying to bring this topic of front-end architecture up much earlier. And when you get into front-end architecture, the definition I pulled together, cobbled together maybe, was that front-end architecture was a collection of tools and processes, both tools and processes, that aim to improve the quality of our front-end code, but while creating a more efficient and sustainable workflow. That quality, efficiency, and sustainability are kind of the big three areas of problems we find ourselves running into as projects get larger and larger and take longer and longer to build. The four pillars, the four kind of areas of focus of front-end architecture, a really one big nebulous one that might get broken up eventually is the code, the actual code that you're writing, how you're breaking things up in your object-oriented, how you're doing your class structures, how you're doing your naming conventions, all of that code, how you're writing your JavaScript, how you're breaking things up, componentizing, all that kind of stuff. But that's just part of the deal, because you also need to be talking about how are you documenting these things? How are you making this accessible to new people coming in? How are you actually making sure that when you write something, you're not just repeating something you've already written a couple months ago because you don't have access to see everything you've already written. On top of that is testing. As projects get larger, you need to make sure you're testing. And that's not only unit testing and behavioral testing on the back end in JavaScript, but also visual regression testing to make sure that the changes you're making to one component or one area aren't breaking other parts of the site that you aren't expecting to make changes to. And lastly, these are lots of pieces, these are lots of processes, these are lots of small random open source tools that get put together. And really the only way to do that properly is through automation. And that's something like Parameter Gulp, being able to take all those tools and hit a button, pull in all your dependencies and build all the things. So that was front-end architecture. I put together a little Git repo that I'll tweet out kind of describing a lot of these things. Happy to take pull requests and feedback and those kind of things. So we're trying to kind of build up this conversation of what front-end architecture is and who the front-end architects are. So what I did at CSS DevConf was basically, raise that flag, lifted the banner up, and said, who's with me? Who else is realizing that they've been doing front-end architecture for the longest time, and they just never had a name? And one of the people that raised their hands very vehemently was our own Elyse Holladay. So I've asked Elise to come in and to help co-host this series for the next however long this craziness goes. And she was kind enough to come on in and do so. So Elise, how you doing?
Hi, good. I'm, as you're saying this, realizing that I've agreed to some indefinite, lengthy Thursday.
I own you. No, it's going to be fun. I've had co-hosts on before, and if you can't make every single one, it's completely okay.
No, I'm really, really excited about this. I was super excited when you gave your talk at CSS DevConf. I think it's something that I know I wasn't the only one that was like, oh, I do that. Like that's what I'm doing, and oh no, have a word for it, which was really cool. I saw lots of people tweeting that and talking about it. And I feel like every time we tweet about it, people say that, to me, and so I'm super excited to do it. I'm excited to have. I think you mentioned like we'll have some guests to talk about kind of what they're doing, how they got into front end architecture, I guess, or how their job kind of went from just doing CSS or being a front end dev in some way to kind of doing the more architectural side of it. So yeah, no, I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's going to be neat. Yeah, as we talk about this more, especially on Twitter and get it out there, it's people coming out of the woodwork. They're like, I totally do that. That's totally me. And yeah, and it's great to finally have that name to kind of all talk about. So with a co-host on here, we get a chance to banter, which is fun, and talk about things. So in the spirit of the Shop Talk show and hot drama and all of those types of things, there's a couple things we want to talk about. First up, what are your Sass resolutions, Elise?
Oh, Sass resolution. Yeah. So no, this was really cool. I put this in the notes because you had tweeted this out, I believe, on the Sass Bites Twitter handle back, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. When did you tweet that out?
Oh, it was the 31st, actually.
31st. Okay, yeah. So I'll be honest. I was I didn't actually respond to it, but I thought it was really interesting to see like I thought about it even if I didn't tweet. Like what are the things that people are thinking about doing Sass this year? And I think that kind of the general response was like contributing. There were so many responses that were, oh, how do I become a core contributor? How do I, do documentation? How do I, submit proposals and talks and like kind of get back into the community, which I thought was really, really cool. A couple more technical ones. Somebody said they wanted to learn how to do Suzy grid systems, which was really cool. But I think for me, strangely enough, it's going to have to be contributing in this very vague sense of like contributing to this concept of front-end architecture and talking about it and talking about what I'm doing. I talk on Twitter and I've given talks and I feel like it's more this like general Sass stuff or like these general talks, but I'm not all that great at actually laying out the work that I'm doing and describing it or like putting code out there. But we're working on some really cool stuff, and I have stuff that I really ought to share, and so I think that's mine.
Gotcha.
What's yours?
Yeah, we'll get a chance to share a little bit of that later on in this episode, as you'll be our guest of honor to do the first.
Yes.
To have the first interview. Anyway, to interview first. Yeah, it was a great response on the Sass resolution. A lot of people saying to learn different grid systems and different frameworks and those types of things. I know a couple of mine was to I think my big one was, and it's so funny because it's not even Sass related, but it's just now that I'm doing Sass in such a componentized way that everything's broken up into like small pieces of functionality that I really want my JavaScript to follow the same methods. Mm-hmm. And as I'm getting more and more organized in my Sass, I'm realizing how disorganized my JavaScript is. So trying to take a lot of lessons I've learned from there and bring it over, I'd say is my big, huge one.
Do you think a lot of those lessons apply kind of one-to-one or?
I think conceptually there's a lot of them that probably apply, but then you have to go and find out like, is that actually best practice and how do you go about doing that? I'm looking at like JS routing frameworks right now of like how can we trigger things happening on a page instead of a click changing the hash and then changing something, like have the click change the hash and the hash triggers something that changes something. So some of those kind of crazy things I just need to wrap my brain around and find out like what's the best way to go about those. So trying to make sure that all the code is, so I can have a small little JavaScript module that easily plugs in the system that goes along with whatever component I've written.
We had a conversation about that at work before the holidays, kind of like, your standard setup is, like your JavaScript folder, your, views, your CSS, whatever, your images. What would it look like, or how would it even work to have, a modular component structure. So you have like, this is my modal, and here's the JavaScript for it, here's the HTML for it, here's the CSS for it, here's whatever. And that's one of those things that I think people, there's some interesting things that are happening, I think, in front-end dev right now. People are like really questioning, oh, we've always done it this way. And people are immediately like, why would you ever do that? Like, why would you put all your component, bits here, like freaking out. But I think there's some like interesting exploration to be done, because we are having so many more tools. There's so many more reasons we want to do stuff like this. Like, architecture has become such a big component of what we do. So I think there's a lot of interesting hot drama around like questioning the way that things have been going, and so I'm curious.
Yeah, what I'm hoping, like, I'm currently in my project, I've got a Sass folder, quote unquote Sass, that has the styles in it, but it also has the HTML markup in it, as well as the JavaScript tests for the visual regression testing. So like, I'm already almost to that point where everything's in that one folder, and it's not really even a Sass folder anymore. It's just like a system folder, a component folder. So if I was able to have an actual JavaScript snippet that instead of writing everything from scratch, was able to kind of tap into the rest of the system. That's what I want to be able to do. So I mean, because all the Sass stuff, like, I'm not writing. You go to Sass partial, it's a bunch of extends and mixins, which will get us into the next hot drama. I'm not writing everything from scratch over and over again. I'm actually just tapping into the rest of the system. So I really want to have a JavaScript setup where it's like that as well, where I can just subscribe to events and publish events and those kind of things, where everything for that one element is in that code, right, in that folder. So that's my resolution, and hopefully 2015 I'll say it's done.
How much would you say, like, if you're doing a system, how much of it would you say is kind of like framework Sass code, like extends and mixins and functions and like things that are setting you up to do stuff, and how much of it would you say is actual like style CSS and polish, like some amount that actually, like, there's no framework that's going to do 100% of everything for you, right? So like, how much would you say is CSS versus framework?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of the front-end architecture portion of it. If you want to talk about that, is I think that's front-end architecture. Kind of the method I use to explain it is the code that you write as a front-end architect is code that's going to be ingested by other developers, not by the end user or the browser. So as a front-end architect, most of what you're doing is you're building tools, you're building frameworks, you're building those pieces and the documentation, the testing, and like making sure that somebody can come in and go, hey, I need to build a component. That was extremely easy and extremely efficient, and I've tapped into the system in the most efficient ways.
Right.
So that's what it is. As far as my job, I'm doing both right now because we're not on a large team. So I get to dog food kind of the things I build, and that's actually.
I was going to say that's going to be really important, because it's easy to write a framework and not really have any good sense of how it's being used, kind of in the real world. And
because it's also trying to figure out, well, how should it be used, and then we need to document how that is actually happening and those types of things. So it's definitely a process because it's still very new. So quick bit of hot drama I mentioned, and we might need our own word because I bet that Chris has got that patented. So we're going to think some money.
We're going to get sued in like 5 minutes.
Probably. Is that concept of extends versus mixins. There is a really great article that Hugo put out a little while ago on one of the publishing platforms that he publishes.
I think it was a SitePoint.
SitePoint, yeah. Okay. Talking about, are mixins actually really, do they add any value to your setup? Like, does that little bit of code that you don't repeat actually make a difference when everything's compressed and G-zipped and sent over the wire? And he actually kind of suggested no, that you get a lot more flexibility out of the mixins. And you don't really lose anything using the extends.
Yeah, and that's kind of a big departure from, like, basically up until a month or so ago, the generally accepted understanding was mixins for things with arguments that you change and extends for things that you don't. And all of a sudden, like in December, whenever that first came out, like the Twitter like exploded. Everybody was just so much going around, and it's really funny to me how bandwagony it kind of is. Like, everybody is saying it. Like I've said it in talks. Everybody who's given a Sass talk or written anything about it has said that kind of stuff. And then like within the last month, there's like all these random people on Twitter that are like, Extend is terrible. Like I don't ever want to use it again. Like what are you doing? It's like, where did all this drama come from? It's very, very stressful.
Yeah, and there's it's also kind of funny because we do or I lead a monthly SaaS meetup here in Portland, which is actually happening just right over there. And one of the topics tonight is what's that?
It's happening right now.
No, not right now. I'm not tonight. It's happening tonight. Still need to order the pizza for it. One of the topics that we're actually talk about is the extends versus mixins, and talk about those. So it's a big topic because it's a large part of the architecture of the SaaS project is what you use there. So that'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. One thing to note is if you are not using a lot of media queries but using a lot of element queries, extends are great because element queries are all usually done with that attribute. So it's like win.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think that first of all, mostly every project's different. Sometimes it's going to be better. Sometimes it's going to be not good for your project. The argument that I see a lot is extend will get you into trouble. It's like you can ruin things for you. It's going to not do things the way that you want. It's going to break all your media. It doesn't work in media queries. Everything's not going to work. But, projects are different. Developers are different. The way that they use stuff is different. The types of sites that you're working on are different. I've been working on these really large-scale enterprise applications, and I have not. Hang on one second. I think like the maintenance guy's here. I have no idea what's happening. Go talk about something else.
Good live stuff. Yeah, I think that the point with that, talking to the audience, because Elise is gone, one of the things I make sure to do is whenever I extend, the only thing I ever extend are silent extends. Because the problem you get into is if you extend, say, .table, because, hey, I want to use the table styles on something. So you're extending every single instance of .table. And if for some reason you've got Bootstrap holding your system, you've just extended like 5,000 selectors because it's not only .table, but it's .table something 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 and something 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 .table and like every single instance, and that's certainly how you can break your code real quick. So yeah, extends are for me. I love the concept of an extend, but it's very true. Like Mixin does pretty much have the same thing. I use them for such different things. I know Chris Bloom was kind of mentioning the same thing. Was like, it's great that you have this separate use case. You've got extends, which are just your chunks of styles that get used different places. Like this is what my title looks like. This is what my unordered list looks like, and you can use those all over the place. And you have mixins, which are like this is what a button looks like when you pass all these different variables into it and things like that. So it's
well,
so nice.
I feel like not understanding how something works doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't give you a platform to go say, oh, this is bad and you should never use it, right? Like if you just don't understand the right way to use it or how the language works. And I did a little test. I was working on some stuff yesterday, and just switching like the clear fix from a mix into an extend saved me like 1 or 2 kilobytes. And it's only like a 2,000 line style sheet. And there's been some really interesting arguments and discussions on gzip and does that kind of negate the benefits. And and now I think there were like CSS people arguing about how like the gzip compression algorithm works. And I'm like, do we really even know like enough to be having this? I don't know enough about the gzip like algorithm to have this conversation. But
it's fun.
Yeah,
it's macro optimization for a lot of the cases. You save yourself 2K, which is great, but then you're serving up 500K images because someone says you have to, and you're like, whatever.
Yeah, and there was some other interesting discussion on Hugo's Sass guidelines GitHub issues, kind of talking about like breaking things up into multiple CSS files, and is that a good idea, or like output multiple CSS files, is that a good idea or a bad idea? One gigantic file versus multiple files, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, like people kind of questioning the ways that we've been doing things. In a previous job, for us, we took the HTTP hit on having multiple files because it actually saved us so much file space and so much like download for individual certain pages and sections that didn't need all this other stuff. Yeah. So it's not. I don't know. I worry that there's so much like this is how you do it. on the internet, and there's so much like, oh, now you can't use extends are bad, and so I
Yeah.
worry that people are like, oh god, well now I can't, you know.
Well, an interesting kind of note on that, because the idea was always that you have this big system and it all gets pulled into one file, and you've got one file that you serve up to the browser. The thing with that is, though, now we've got, that's when we were just running Compass. Like Compass just compiled and it came down to one file. But now we've got these large build systems with Grunt and Gulp, where it's like, what's the problem of compiling your Sass down to 20 different files? Because then you just take Grunt and go and pull it all together and then serve that up. Or in case of Drupal, where Drupal just pulls those and concatenates them anyway. So you have the idea of like, if I'm only working on this one component and this component doesn't affect anything in the entire rest of the system, why am I compiling the entire system every time I save this component?
Sure.
So huge. I mean, I think that's a really good point. It might get negated a bit if you are over in libsass land and you've got crazy fast compile times. But if you're running Ruby and you've got like, a whole bunch of layout that takes a long time to process, like that might make sense to have a layout partial.
Functions and mixins and things that take a long time to compile. Natalie was saying the other day, like all the optimization stuff that she's working on is really geared towards that, because that's the stuff that takes so long to compile. And yeah, it's like, why do that every single time if you're only like working in this one little tiny, page? And yeah, I could talk about that stuff for forever, but we should probably move on. I had one last link that I wanted to share that shared out at work before I got on today, and it was the 2014 CSS report from QuickLeft. And we'll tweet that out. It was super fascinating. They downloaded CSS files from about 8,000 domains and kind of aggregated how CSS was being used. And I won't go into all the details, but it was really fascinating. They talked about what are the most common selectors, distribution of selector length, how they were using progressive enhancement, what the most common colors are, all these really interesting things. And I think that's another topic that I've seen a lot in the past month or two has been, what are we really doing? Like, we can talk about performance, we can talk about Sass and tools and plugins and all these things, but what does it really look like when you get out there on the internet? What are those CSS files that are actually going to production looking like? And what is the performance of those things actually like? And so I think that ties in a lot different in architecture too. It's not just, oh, I'm going to go write some CSS and make this look pretty. Like, you care a whole lot about, perf testing and what that end result looks like, in the sense of you care about this kind of holistic swath of things on your website. So we'll share that link out. It was super fascinating.
I already put it out. So I went on the now, so you're good to go.
Super fast. That's awesome. And be sure to read all the way down to the bottom, guys and ladies, and check out the Z-index trivia. That's one of the funnier things that I've read in a while. It was pretty good stuff. So.
That is killer. Sweet. We could probably do an entire episode just kind of looking through that and trying to pull out whatever information we can from that.
Maybe we should have him on the podcast.
Nice. Cool. So there's our Hog Drama little section. What we really want to do here is talk to Elise and about Elise, because funny story with you. You found yourself looking for a new job this last year, right? Not to highlight too much of it. She came to me on Twitter, and we were talking in some DMs. So I was like, don't worry about it. You're gonna have like this like avalanche of offers coming down, and you're like, no, it's going to be tough. It's almost Christmas time.
It was like a week before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
It was like 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. So it was right before the holidays, and I was like, this is a terrible time to be job hunting.
And my point was that, like, this is going to take no time whatsoever. Yeah. My challenge to you is going to be wait long enough for the right thing. And how long was it? How many days?
I was technically unemployed for, I think, 72 hours, like between my last day and like I started I started at Retail Me Not. So for those of you who are online shoppers or coupon fanatics, it's online couponing, but they are headquartered here in Austin, and it was actually really funny. I got a tip from Cassandra Perch, who was there before, kind of saying, hey, like we really need somebody with some Sass experience or CSS experience. There's a lot of internal like re-architecture kind of discussions going on, and we don't have somebody whose like primary history has been that. And so I was having some conversations with them that it was really just serendipitous timing. Like I was looking, and the job description that I was, helping them kind of come up with really was front end architecture. Like that was exactly what it was, and I was kind of sitting there going like, is this really gonna work out? Like, is this really gonna happen? But yeah, so I had interviewed, and then I signed my offer on a Monday morning, and they were like, well, there's some meetings we kind of want you to come to, and Monday, it was on Monday, they wanted me to come in for a couple of meetings on Tuesday, and then I was like, oh, start next week or whatever. And I got an email at 5 o'clock from my new manager, and he was like, do you want to just start tomorrow? You want to just like come in? So I just like showed up the next morning, and yeah, it was pretty funny. It was like my one like weekend of being unemployed. So
must have just been a horrible weekend.
It was the same as every other one.
So yeah, it's a pretty awesome time in the industry to be, especially the architecture in general. I think a lot of people, it's kind of what happened around 2010 when people realized like, responsive web design, what is this? We need it. Like we don't have people that know this. So if you knew responsive web design, like you had an easy like opportunity to get a job. Like there are people.
And I remember like 2010, 2011 going to Event Apart and Artifact here in Austin, and that was every talk was responsive design process and talking to clients about it and how do you make that work into your workflow, and that was all everybody was talking about.
So now to see people realizing that, hey, these front end spaghetti frameworks that we've built, we really need someone to like corral this and direct it and trying to do something with it. And I'm really hoping that we can continue like just pushing this, like it's a front end architect. You need a front end architect. You should get a front end architect. You should talk about your architecture, your front end systems. And I was
surprised. Like I think the name is going to really be a big deal because I actually I spoke at the Mixin, the San Francisco Sass meetup when I was out there in December, and I had a couple people like, we're hiring for this role, but oh, is this what we call it now? And so I think having that name out there will really, really go a long way to help, because people they need it and they want it. And in a lot of cases, I mean, I know, like you said, you're doing both kind of the visual, like design CSS as well as the architecture side of it. And I'm not at this job, but, at a previous job I was. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap for people, and like maybe your title isn't architecture, but still like being able to talk about it. And like if that's a direction you want to go in your career, like having a title to say, okay, well, this like more like this and less like doing CSS or what have you. So.
Yeah, I've been finding myself today working on realizing that I need a style guide to create patterns and ideas for the style guide of what we're building. Of like, how should we display this code, and how should we we need some content strategy for the style guide we're building. And I'm like, we're building a website to document the website, and it's just.
Yeah, we were having that conversation. I know we're gonna be talking about it more next week, but like, what does our style guide app look like, right? Like, what do we surface? What do we show? What kind of notes? What kind of commentary? Like, how much detail? Like, what is, what's the navigation of it? All these things. It's like, yeah, building the website for the website. So
yeah,
so funny.
Yeah, because we're realizing as we build the style guide out that the different users, all the different if you go into a sprint session or doing an agile, and you're like, okay, who are your users? Like, what are the user profiles that we're using for this project? And there are like 3, 4, 5 different users that are all ingesting the style guide and using it for either for implementation and development, or for QA, or the business analysts, or or us that are continuing to build it, because it's basically self-documented of like, this is how it's been built, this is how you built more. And so it's really kind of it's interesting seeing all the different people that see this and go like, wow, this is awesome. Hey, it can also do this, or it can also show that, or realizing that, oh, you want to see all the markup over there and also over there. And so it's been a huge learning process to kind of get that into the wild and go larger.
We've been talking a lot about, can this be a place that designers can like sandbox new ideas for new features, and like kind of our own little internal CodePen-esque, like it's automatically injected our, base styles, and you can kind of play with things. And so there's been some interesting talks around that.
Nice. Are you using any? I mean, this is more kind of like, what are you guys doing Like, what tools are you using? What have you kind of discovered in this process? I know it's only been, what, several weeks?
It's been a couple weeks,
um,
yeah, but a lot of it's been, holiday and, people being out and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
yeah, so what we're working on is a project that we're calling Roux. So, the base of sauces, et cetera, the ingredients that you start a website with. And we've been working kind of hand in hand with the design team. They are trying very hard to come up with some, like design standards approved thing. So, fonts, colors, buttons. This is, the coupon card. This is the, sign in. This is pagination. Whatever. They have this long list of things they're trying to kind of redo because, obviously the website doesn't all look the same all the way across, and it should. And, there are a lot of reasons for that. We have the store page, and we care about performance and conversion on the store page much more than we do on the home page, and like all these labs projects that we have out and all these things. And so it becomes very easy for the website to get very fragmented. And so we've been working with them and trying to figure out kind of like what are the base ingredients, right, that we can use to make the website. And so what we're going to be doing is building not only and I've actually been trying to get away from saying style guide because for us, I mean, maybe for a lot of projects that's what it is, but for us it's more of a living like documentation thing. I mean, like it shows the way that some things look, but it's not just that. It should show documentation for helper code and for kind of like the folder structure and the architecture itself and how to use that stuff. And so we're calling it like we have Roux, the app, which is like the thing that you look at, and then maybe hopefully where you can also do design sandboxing and like coming up with new features and things like that. But then also Roux ingredients, which is the ingredients themselves, and that's going to be kind of this consumable package that other apps can use. And so we've been trying to figure out, what are our users for Roux? Like who is going to be using this? And obviously it's, UI engineers who are actually building the website itself. It's designers who may want to prototype a new thing or get it in front of their users. Maybe it's developers who like doing a hackathon project and they want to pull in all these styles. There's lots of different users there. And so then we have the thing that I'm actually the most excited about right now is we have our container. And one of our engineers, well, a couple of my engineers on my team are working on basically like a CLI for Roux itself, so you
right.
can like Roux cook and like get the particular set of ingredients that you want, like which we're calling a recipe. So you have like, okay, I'm gonna have this recipe and it's gonna have like these like telling okay, these Sass files go here. Or I want these ingredients or whatever, and so you can like cook your own like recipe to like start this project. And so we're kind of working on some of that architectural stuff right now, the architecture of the architecture even, because for us we're not starting a new project, right? We're not and this is a topic near and dear to my heart. We're not working on client websites, so it's not this new thing where it's like, oh, okay, what's our folder structure and organization, how are we going to do this, like let's design all these new things. We have a very, very massive website that they do tons and tons of A/B tests on, tons of performance. We can't just go and like, we're just going to change everything all at once. Like, no big deal, guys. So we're working kind of in this like twofold path of working with the design standards team to kind of get all of these new designs in, and they're kind of working on the actual website at the same time. And then I'm working on taking some subset of patterns that are on the website now and putting them into this consumable package so that we can have the website consume Roux, make sure that doesn't break anything, and then kind of slowly start like cycling these new designs back in. So there's like multiple parallel things that are kind of going on to try to do something like this, because we're like redesigning the site and building this consumable tool and figuring out how the tool is going to work. And so in terms of like tools and things we're using, I mean, we're not using anything that's out there. We did a whole lot of research, and we looked at hologram, and we looked at I don't know, like everything. What's like styleguide.io or whatever that has like all the list of them.
Yeah, there's quite a few out there.
Yeah, so we looked into all of them, and a lot of them for us were pulling comment information from the Sass files themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we weren't sure that that was going to be exactly the way that we wanted to do it, because in the future we want this to actually contain the templates themselves. So the HTML, the rendered HTML, the Sass, the rendered CSS, and so we've been kind of trying to figure out like how do we show, what kind of commentary do we show, where do we show it from. I don't want to put HTML in our Sass files because that's just like a recipe for getting things out of date immediately, at least on a project this big, maybe not on a smaller one. You know, like it might not be such a big deal on a smaller project, but for us that just seemed like a terrible option. And so yeah, so then we wanted to do kind of like the command line interface thing as well. So we've been kind of doing our own, but what we started based on Brad Frost's pattern lab. So we have things kind of broken down into atoms, molecules, organisms, you know, grouping.
It's quite convenient. He's going to be here in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yes, I'm excited about that. He's got a new. Did you see his post about his new book?
I did. He'll have a chance to plug it. It's a perfectly good timing.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to him about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're building basically building atomic, but you're using ingredients and recipes instead of atoms and molecules.
Well, so we're using atoms, molecules, and organisms as a size declaration. I think we're just considering all of those things an ingredient, right? So an ingredient would be any kind of combination of some HTML and CSS in some way, and even like helpers, like the clear fix. Like there's no output really. There's no HTML, but I'm still considering that an ingredient. It's still a thing that helps you cook your project, right? So we're just kind of really using the cooking metaphor as our own like internal naming thing, but still using atoms, molecules, the pattern lab type stuff as like a sizing hierarchy, right?
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the running. It's the best way to kind of explain how these pieces get broken down. And like I know here in our team, we've all come to the same conclusion from different directions of this concept of how things are broken down into an atom, a molecule, and even if we don't have the same names, we basically all came to that same conclusion. And so coming into a single naming convention just totally makes sense.
We went back to the pattern lab naming convention because we had all these discussions about, okay, well, modules, components, patterns, like which one is the smallest, you know, and you could argue it any which way, and it's fine if you can all agree on the same name, you know, and I was doing it a certain way where, you know, in my mind, like a component was smaller than a module and you know, but we were always confused, and so we just atom, molecule, organism is very, very straightforward. It automatically shows that size hierarchy, and I think that's much easier for everyone to keep track of. So we just went back to that to make everybody's life. How about this? The lives of people who are not directly involved in the project and talking about it all the time, I think can still comprehend that size hierarchy very quickly instead of us having to constantly be explaining, like, oh no, components are bigger than whatever. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing. I'm sure over these next 5 months, as I've now purchased your soul on this podcast, hearing more how that all comes out and what you're learning. I mean, because I think we're both going through a very similar process of like we have a live site that we're trying to basically recreate lots of pieces and try to do it in a way that's going to be a lot more useful. So it'll be kind of interesting to see as we both go down these paths of the things we find out and as we go along. So you also did a talk just recently, just to kind of wrap this up because I know we're getting long on time. I appreciate everyone that stuck around. It's awesome. You did a talk recently on front-end architecture. Do you want to talk about that real quick? Is there any place that people can get those slides, or is it online or something?
I think I will apologize in advance. I'll post the slide link, but I think my fonts aren't working. So if it's an impact, I swear it wasn't like that when I presented it, and I need to fix it, but I haven't gotten around to it. So I'm sorry, it's ugly. But I gave this at the Mix-It in San Francisco when I was out there for CSSConf Oakland, which was fantastic. Gina was kind enough to invite me to speak there, and this had kind of been on my mind. You know, obviously I just started at Retail Me Not, and I was kind of thinking about what is it that I'm going to be doing, and what is it that makes my role different than, you know, just general front-end development stuff. And so I did some researching, and obviously, you know, kind of based it off of your quote around, you know, a collection of tools and processes. But I found this interesting quote, not quote, I don't know what I'm saying. I looked up the definition of architecture, and it's architecture is both the process and product of planning, designing, and constructing buildings and other physical structures. And I love that. It's saying the process and the product, right? And I think that that was a really interesting little phrase for me thinking about front end architecture, because a lot of what we are doing, I think, is the process of figuring out, planning and designing and planning the structure of things, and writing, those mix-ins or extends or whichever side of that debate you fall on, writing your grid system, like all these things. And it's the product of that. It's, your style guide, it's the code itself, it's whatever tools and automation. But it's not necessarily, in our case, the building itself, in the same way that architecture, it's the process and product of that, but it's not actually like the building, and so for us, it's not actually the website. And you said this earlier, a front-end developer's audience is the user, right? Like a front-end developer or a CSS, web designer or whatever, like they write code, they write CSS for the browser, for the user. They care about these little visual styles, polish and animation and like all these things. And a front-end architect's audience really is the developers themselves. And it's a really different thing when you start thinking about that you are writing code for other people rather than for the browser to consume. And obviously, like a front-end architect, you care about performance, you care about all these things, but I also care a whole lot more about long-term maintainability and, code readability and all of these things, so that other people can actually like build the website. So the 3 points that I put in the talk are an internal audience, developer ergonomics, and long-term maintenance. And so again, we're not writing for the browser, we're writing for other people. And developer ergonomics, I asked this question, like, what's your primary skill set, and how often do you struggle, like, doing other stuff? Like, if you want to do this new layout, like, you don't, and your job is, like, or you're trying to do a feature, and you're mostly a JavaScript developer, and you're, like, struggling with floats, like, that's not your primary job, right? Like, let somebody else do that. So I kind of talked a little bit about that, and
awesome. Well, I already tweeted those slides out,
yeah.
So make sure you're following Sass Bites there, and you'll get those. And I'm sure you've got stuff popping up on your window all over the place when I mention you.
I have Twitter off, so I'm not seeing it, but I'll get on Twitter and check it out. But yeah, awesome. It was a cool talk. I'd love to kind of expand it out and give it again. And for me, it was a lot of just kind of like defining what it is that I'm doing and that my role is going to be, and hopefully, some of y'all, if this is something that you think you're kind of doing or you're getting towards in your work, and you want to have a way to, go talk to your manager, like, hey, I don't want to be building, whatever anymore. Like, I want to focus more on this architectural stuff. Like, maybe that'll give you a little place. And Mike is excellent GitHub repo as well. Tons of information there to kind of find it. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure I'll tweet that out as well. I should actually. Oh, I've actually created a Sass Bites organization on GitHub now. Should probably just move it over to there. I will do that. Working on a website. It'll come eventually. I've been lucky enough to get some help from the Sass community to put a website together.
Oh, you're a super cute little chef guy.
Exactly. I appreciate Unicron, the destroyer of worlds, or whatever you call it. So it's been awesome getting some help out there. So people, if you're a designer and you have design skills, if you ever want to contribute, design. Like most people that are heavy in code, like they have, I don't want to say they have zero talent, because I'm sure there's people out there that do, but many of them have zero talent. So
primary skill set.
Yeah, not the primary.
We also need intro music. So if any of you guys are, give us some intro music so we don't have to make it ourselves like we did today, which was not good.
Ironically, my actual degree is audio production, so I really don't have much of an excuse. But if someone else has desire, I will be more than happy to take them up on that.
I didn't know.
Just you can learn something a little bit every week, that's for sure. So, all right, we were way long, so let me give you a heads up that next week we're going to have, if you know him, Welch Canavan. Hopefully I pronounced his last name right, because I didn't realize I never tried saying it. He's a front-end architect. If you check, we had actually kind of this funny thing after the after front-end or CSS DevConf. We had this big old thing where all changed our Twitter bios. So I don't know if you had that before or after, but His Twitter bio is very specifically front-end architect. He works out at National Geographic doing a lot of work for them. We're going to dive into listening or hearing about what he's doing there. He's actually using Hologram, and that's kind of, I think he's the one that he did a great write-up on it, and that kind of pushed me towards using Hologram ourselves. But we've completely created a Frankenstein out of it, so that's kind of fun. But we'll be talking to him about what he's doing, how he's using style guides, and how front-end architecture works within National Geographic. So I'm sure that's going to be a great story.
That's super exciting.
Yeah, and then after that, Brad Frost, and then we also have Snuka coming on. Jonathan Snook. I'm like, I just know him by Snuka. What is it? Jonathan Snook. Yeah, he's going to be on early February. So we've got some great guests lined up. We're looking to get a few more on to fill in some of those other gaps. And
yeah, so if you want to be on, or if you know somebody who you think should be, or whatever, like, bring it on. Tweet us. Let us know.
Killer. So I want to again thank Elise for coming by, and I want to thank her employer for having a flexible enough schedule that she can do it, which is always great. And we'll catch you next week. So keep following us at Sass Bites there, at Micah Godbolt, and at yours, Elyse Holladay, right? On Twitters?
Yep.
If you follow Sass Bites, I tweet out a couple of things with her mention that, so you can follow her as well. So catch us next week. We should be hopefully pretty regular on this whole Thursday thing. And we'll keep going from there. So appreciate everyone sticking around. It's going to be a fun ride as we learn more about front-end architecture. So see you next week. Thanks.
Bye.